And now I'd like to introduce our terrific panel on this issue. Please join me in welcoming the Minister of State for the United Arab Emirates, Reem Al-Hashimi. John Chambers, the Chairman and CEO of Cisco. Ashish Thakkar, who's the founder of the Mara Group and the Mara Foundation. And Nisreen Metwale, who's an alumna of the Education for Employment program, EFE. Thanks, Nisreen. So we have a great panel here, and as a journalist, I do a lot of panels, sometimes on youth, and in some other venues, there are often a bunch of old fogies talking about young people. And here we have an expert, Nisreen. And so let me start with you. You're 23, from Jerusalem, and it sometimes seems to me that, since I come from more the progressive end of the political spectrum, I don't quote Ronald Reagan very much, but one of the things he said is that the best form of aid is spelled not A-I-D, but J-O-B. And indeed, it does strike me that a lot of young people, almost everywhere I travel, and certainly in the West Bank, unemployment is huge, is very, very high, that is a frustration, that unemployment is jobs are very much what people are seeking. Talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, can you repeat this question?
Sure. So, in terms of how young people, so in the West Bank or anywhere else you are, so what do young people want, and to what extent is that indeed jobs as opposed to other kinds of, more direct assistance?
Okay. As a fresh graduate, like any other graduate, I start to pump my resume from one place to another, telling my family, my friends that I really need the opportunity to work. And really, every step was with a failure, no work. So I had into this psychological situation that I felt so stressful and frustration. It was so hard not to contribute to myself, my family, or anything. So then I heard about this foundation, Education for Employment, where they do a job training and placement organization. So I was like, okay.
And I should say that Education for Employment, that came out of a commitment here a few years ago.
Yes.
To provide 13,000 jobs, and you were one of the beneficiaries of that program.
Yes, and I heard about Education for Employment from my friends that they were already setting in the job and they got it through the Education for Employment. And when I entered this training, I was so fascinating how they do the training, where they let you to learn about the workplace, how to write the resume in an attractive way, how to get through the interview in an amazing way, and communication skills, soft skills, leadership, and so on. So I believe such an organization, even Education for Employment or other, that they do focus on training us, but Education for Employment, it was so different that they connect us to the work. They follow up and they connect us to the work. So
it was less maybe just about the skills training as such and more about that network.
This is the most important thing, that after 1 month and a half, I got connected with my employer, and I now work for one of the biggest insurance companies, Ethad Insurance Company, where we deal with 100 to 13,000 people. So that was really good and amazing.
Well, and they're lucky to have you. You'll be running it someday soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
John Chambers, so you're running a company with 60,000 employees, and one of the disjunctions that this panel reflects is that there are so many companies that are desperately seeking to hire people, to fill vacancies. I think in the US, 40% of companies say they have trouble filling vacancies, and yet there are so many young people who are unemployed, 75 million worldwide. your company, you have some experience in trying to address that mismatch. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Basically, when we looked at one of the limitations for our company's growth, it was there was not enough people with networking skills in the market to really meet both our needs, but more importantly, our customer needs. And we started network academies where we now train 1.2 million students a year. 90% of them use what they learn in the academies every day, and it gives a skill set for where the market's going. But one of the neat things about CGI and what you pick up from this panel, it's how you tie together education with where is the job opportunity and how can NGOs, employers, and government make that connection so Nisreen, the example of her success, is more common. We've done that with communities for knowledge centers throughout Africa as an example, and all of a sudden you look at a person who learns through technology English and then goes to one of these community centers. They're taught how do you apply for a job, how do you really make a difference. The guy in question is John Q, one of our initiatives back to 2007 at CGI, and all of a sudden he not only gets a job and improves his English skills and becomes a guide for tourists, he learns French, and all of a sudden he's supporting his whole family. So it is how do you really get an education for where the jobs will be, but how perhaps NGOs and government and business can work together to solve the problems.
And I mean, this is something that should be in companies' own self-interest, presumably, if there are so many companies that are having trouble filling vacancies. So is this a case where enlightened self-interest actually, meets philanthropic goals, where CSR or philanthropy and corporate self-interest converge?
Well, I think it does. On the bigger picture, I personally believe that those who have been the most successful in life owe an obligation to give back. And so we try to change the world, and we really mean it. But there's a one-to-one correlation between corporate social responsibility and our success in countries around the world. Wherever we've led in corporate social responsibility, you actually have the best business growth, et cetera. But it does speak to a failing. Our education system is training people for where the jobs used to be. It's not training people for where the jobs are. And when you match those together, you can take an area like Palestine, and you can all of a sudden take the GDP that does high tech from 0.5% to 6.5% with all the jobs in 3 years. But it does require a community to make that happen. Is it in the best interest of business to do that? Absolutely, but it's also a failing of our education system. We have to do a lot better job of training our young people and people re-entering the market for where the jobs are, not where they've been before.
By the way, I'd like to invite you to help me ask questions. We won't be calling for questions quite from the audience as such, but you can tweet your questions. And there is somebody in a little room somewhere who is watching those tweets and that hashtag, and then will feed me some of those questions. So do help out, whether you are in the room or watching online, and offer up some questions. Reem, so John was talking about educational failures and the challenges. And I think when we talk about this issue and educating for employment, we tend to think of technical education, maybe vocational education, kind of at the high end. Now, you run Dubai Cares, which is one of the leading global education supporting primary education. And I bet you would argue, and I sure would, that that we need to think about, educate about solving that disjunction in part by addressing primary education globally.
Thank you, Nick. Yes, absolutely. The primary education represents the building blocks. But like John said, sometimes even in that type of setting, you have children in school, but they're not really learning much. I believe the latest figures was that UNICEF have identified almost 70 million children who are not in school, but 250 million who are in school and who are actually not learning basic numeracy and basic literacy. So that in and of itself presents a problem, because you do need to have the basic foundation so that the skills and the vocational training that kicks in later on as a young adult actually can be effective. Now, that's not always applicable in all industries, but I think it is quite important to have that. You can't only have that, because that won't prepare you for a job, but having that will actually give you a stronger and a better chance. And so Dubai Cares, which was founded 6 years ago, is focused very much on providing access to children with primary education. And we focus on several elements, whether it's teacher training or it's sanitation and quality of teaching. Because it's easy to come up with the big numbers and to say we're able to access X million children. But if we can't also demonstrate that these kids are actually learning, then we've disillusioned ourselves and we've disillusioned the communities, and we actually have not been as effective as we hope we are.
You know, I think that's a really important point, because so often in discussing education of any kind, our metrics are numbers of people in class or studying. And I can't tell you how often I've been to schools around the world where the students show up, but the teachers don't, because the teachers are paid whether or not they actually go to school. Or in this, I mean, I'm a huge believer in this country in early childhood education, in universal pre-K, but it's clear that quality is what it makes a huge difference. And I think we need to kind of change the way we look at education and the analytical tools we use, so we're less impressed by raw numbers and the inputs, and maybe focus more on metrics and evaluation having to do with the outputs.
You know, we have a rather aggressive monitoring and evaluation policy, but we didn't start out like that. When we started out looking at enrollment rates, and so the higher the enrollment rates, the more excited we got. But then when you really evaluate the quality of what is being taught and how it's being taught, then that also is a very important factor that needs to kick in. Because sometimes, you know, the teacher does show up, but the classroom is too full, or the teacher is not well equipped or well trained to be able to access that many kids in one classroom or in one setting. And so you can't use a cookie cutter approach. Even in one country, different communities necessitate a different approach as well. And so, although the numbers and the figures are very alluring and very appealing and have a very feel-good factor to it, we sort of need to see a little bit beyond that and try to focus on the substance, because eventually these 5 and 7 and 8-year-olds are going to be disenfranchised 13, 14 and 15-year-olds looking for a job. And now most folks are saying you don't need to look for a job, you need to create a job, which makes it all the more harder in developing countries where, you know, getting that far was hard enough to start with.
Yes, I want to add something on this. It's right. Educational degree cannot 100% guarantee your work. And that's what I got in my training, soft skills and technical skills. Soft skills that covered communication, and she mentioned that we don't need traditional ways. And that was the best part in my training, that the training was passed to us in untraditional ways, in life scenarios, sharing experiences, and even games. And I just want, it popped to my mind when she said untraditional, this game, marshmallows and pasta sticks, where they divided us into a group of 5 people. We were 6 groups, and you need this to build the highest and, let's say, the most nicest structure from marshmallow and pasta sticks. The best part was that I ate some of the marshmallows, and we ended up, after the training, and I was, okay, the play was done, and then we discovered it wasn't about to play. It was about how to communicate into the group, how to make networking with the other groups, how to face problem, do critical thinking to solve this problem. And I really sensed leadership. I lived teamwork, and I lived the workplace in this simple game, and it was so much fun. So we need this untraditional way of making things, such as training and organization who support these untraditional ways.
You know, I think the point about soft skills is really important. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But Ashish, let me first put you on the spot. You know, CGI in general is kind of a celebration of the power of education, the transformative power of education. And I think a lot of us believe that the best escalator out of poverty is indeed education. But you have an amazing life story. your family was evicted first from Uganda, then fled Rwanda in the genocide, and indeed at age 15, I believe, you dropped out of school, borrowed $5,000, and parlayed it into incredibly successful business. So I guess what I'm afraid of is that you're an argument against the power of education. So please convince me that I'm wrong.
No, you're spot on. Everybody should quit school at the age of 15.
Okay, paddle over.
No, I'm kidding. I think, education is obviously a very important element. However, I feel informal education is even more important. Soft skills, like Her Excellency mentioned, and Nasreen's been talking about. I think networking, mentorship, creating those kind of practical kind of learnings that can actually make a difference to somebody's life is what it's all about. And therefore, I'm a big fan of informal education rather than the formal education system as a structure.
And what about the role of entrepreneurship in this? We tend to think of addressing employment imbalances by teaching people particular skills that the formal labor market lacks. Should we also be thinking in terms of giving people an education like groups like InJazz do about how to come up with a business plan, how to start some kind of a venture?
I think this is absolutely crucial. And if we take Africa as an example, I mean, 80% of our population is under the age of 35. We have a big unemployment issue, like many parts of the world. I feel, sometimes our governments focus on FDI, foreign direct investment, as an answer to unemployment, whereas it's frankly not. It's nurturing small and medium enterprises that's going to solve the issue. So I think it's all about trying to nurture these small and medium enterprises, creating businesses. Mara Mentor that we've created is a mentorship platform of just as one example that creates, truly enables, empowers, and inspires young entrepreneurs and women entrepreneurs across the continent. Today, we are empowering over 123,000 businesses on the continent. So there are tools of that nature that you can create that are practical, that will make a difference, and that will help take these entrepreneurs to the next level. I mean, our youth on the continent, majority of their parents are either civil servants or farmers. Who do they turn to for advice? The education system doesn't provide them the guidance they need. And unfortunately, FDI doesn't create the jobs that we need. So we do need to create it for ourselves, and therefore, entrepreneurship is absolutely crucial.
When you look at job creation, Nick, what Ashish has been very modest about, he said 122,000 entrepreneurs follow his advice in terms of how you do this. So the number one thing that many young people want around the world is, how do you teach me entrepreneurship? In high tech, the second hottest area going is all around connecting these hundreds of millions of devices that are now coming to be. And then it's also about what you do on areas such as data security, et cetera. So we're training people for where the jobs used to be rather than where they are today. And it requires a community really to bring it home on that. Not the least of which is, how do you connect once the person gets the skills with where the job is? And whether it's people returning from the military in this country, their resume doesn't make sense to a business employer. So how do companies come together and do that translation? How do you do that on gender basis in UAE or in the United States or in Israel, where you give people who have the right education, the right opportunity going forward, and sponsor people to make it happen?
Well, let me ask about that gender dimension, maybe Reem. Now, one of the inequities of the world is that while the internet and technology provide extraordinary new chances for productivity, for education, those go disproportionately to boys, to men in a household. Women have less access to the internet, to mobile phones. Does that also perpetuate and perhaps even amplify the gender gap opportunities in employment? And if so, what do we do about it?
We're fortunate in the United Arab Emirates to be really pioneers, I think, in integrating women in not only government, but also in the business field, as well as their boards of directors, parliament, etc. Really in a very unexpected way, if you will, from our part of the world, where more likely than not you find the opposite side of the coin. Empowering women is not because it's a nice thing to do. If you don't do that, you're not going to have prosperity. So it's less of a good, sort of a nice to have or a feel good type of policy. If you are serious about improving the status of your economy, if you're serious about delivering on your economic agenda, if you are serious about creating prosperity for your citizens, and you're not going to empower women, you're never going to do it. And you're never going to break the cycle of poverty. So I sometimes get really annoyed when people say, oh, for women, we're doing this. No, you're not doing this for women. You're doing this because you need to do it. Because if you don't do it, you're never going to get to what you think you want. And so technology has been a massive enabler, if you will, in trying to do this. And John was telling me earlier that with Cisco in the UAE, they have a very large percentage of their workforce, almost 53% you had mentioned.
Yes,
53 or so.
basically in the network academies, if you look across the Arab world, 35% of the attendees are female because they see a way of getting a job. In UAE, it's 53%, and they score higher than men across the world.
And that's not surprising that we score higher than men. But I think...
Yeah.
But I think really, certainly with education, and we've noticed this quite prominently, we have a lot of our programs focused on girls' education particularly, because it really is and has a very transformative impact and transformative repercussions in the community itself. Once a girl starts going to school, and once she is more aware of what opportunities and challenges exist for her, then you see automatically a whole series of macroeconomic indicators come into play. And the use of technology is a fantastic enabler, and we need to capitalize on that and harness that power.
So we have some, some really smart people out here who are engaged in this world. And one of the points that I think all of you have emphasized is that education to address employment is not just about those technical skills. I mean, it's really about networks. It's about those soft skills. Here in the U.S., it may be about teaching people how to dress appropriately, shake hands firm, all these kinds of things. And I wonder what advice you have for folks out here who want to intervene, who want to make a difference, how they can support education in a way that will make a difference, how you incorporate those soft skills. And I throw that out to you're maybe a good person to address that, because I think that in the West Bank, I believe youth unemployment is 44%, but half of those unemployed
Yes.
Young people actually have university degrees and still can't find a job.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I believe that companies or investors or employers, they really need to give the chance for the youth, because youth are full of power, energy. They are creative, have building and developing ideas. And plus, and the most important thing, they have the desire to give back for this company, employer. And it will all wrap up for the economic status, which is going to be better and. For myself, I'm really, as a youth, I'm looking for scholarship in for master's degree and hopefully PhD degree to add up to these skills, so I believe that if I get a work, I can step forward for my dream, which to build my own youth community work, or to host maybe a TV show on health sector. So in order to do this, I need all these skills, and I need this organization, and that give me hope back, what the EFE did for me. And I need this employer who believe in me. And this is really, to put it on a spot, that it's so good for also young women to get this opportunity, because she will be growing financially independent, and therefore she will be contributing to herself, to her family, and the community. And so I believe that youth need this chance. And me, as Nasreen, Palestinian girl, and youth as all need you all to believe in us. We need your support. And I think that we can work all together for this future where it's full of brightness, fullness, and I don't want to be so idealistic, some of hardship and success, plus lower rates of unemployment. And at this point, I can just say that nothing can be impossible and everything can be reachable. Yes.
Bravo. One of the great transformations that is taking place has to do with mobile technology. And I mean, I'm often struck when I travel in poor parts of the world that I'll get to a village where there will be no toilets, but there will be lots of mobile phones. And indeed, worldwide, more people now have access to a mobile phone than have access to a toilet. John, this is area of technology, and the transformation of technology is one you're obviously very close to. How is mobile going to create jobs, going to change the way in which public-private partnerships can indeed try to address these imbalances, or do they simply raise productivity levels so that there's more capital investment and less investment in labor to make things?
I'm the optimist, and I think what you're going to see is more and more devices as it gets connected to the internet will transform everything we do, from education to healthcare to manufacturing to cities, etc. And the mobile smartphone is just one device. I think education will be delivered that way, and it will probably turn education on its head. You'll basically watch the class on a device, and then you meet to do the collaboration that we talked about for the skill sets. But this is where I think we have a chance as a world to realize where the next frontier will be in high tech, and it's going to be about connecting 50 billion devices in 15 years. And it will change and transform every industry, and it will create jobs, whether you're in Palestine, whether you're in the US, whether you're in South Africa, in ways that haven't been done before. And when government leaders see this, they ought to partner with business and education and NGOs to say, how do we create the jobs that productivity will be on the backhand, perhaps taking away? And so I think you're about to see probably the biggest move in technology in the next 10 years we've seen, that makes the internet and all the benefits we've seen in job creation small by a factor of 5 to 10-fold versus where we're going to go. So I'm actually the optimist here. And Ashim, you know this. You combine that with entrepreneurship, and you suddenly begin to get a combination on what we could do together.
If I could just add to that, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think, you know, look at Africa as an example. The fact that we don't have legacy systems, we're able to truly leapfrog. Today in Kenya, a grandmother in a rural area having money on her mobile phone is normal. In the United States, it's not, right? So we are truly able to leapfrog in so many different ways. And this is just the beginning. We are literally skimming the surface. The fact that our mobile phone penetration, we have more mobile phone devices than North America and Western Europe put together. I mean, now what we do with this, with education, with healthcare, with connectivity, with, you know, spreading the right messages and harnessing that energy in the right direction, it's going to be unbelievable.
I always think that the great revolution in mobile phones is less communication than is banking, and that with so much of the world unbanked, and the chance now to actually bank, and especially to have savings schemes where you can save money on your mobile phone for the first time, or the accountability that you get with education, so that then you can actually determine if teachers do show up at school, and if they don't get paid, in ways that can be transformational, that, you know, that we're only beginning to see these. Now, we have a few questions coming in from Twitter, and let me ask, I think we only have time for one, but let me toss it out. We have somebody asking on Twitter whether higher education institutions should be doing a better job, not just kind of educating people in the classroom and firing them out, but actually trying to connect people to the workplace in some of the ways you're talking about.
I'll lead with it. I think, using the U.S. as an example, it isn't just higher education. I think our K through 12 system's broken. We've got to retrain people for where the jobs will be. And when they get to higher education, there needs to be a lot more focus on where the jobs will be in the future, not where they've been in the past. And then perhaps higher education can partner with business and with government and NGOs to say, how do we place the people as they come out of this to do the connectivity between their skill sets and balance? So I do think higher education has to transform, or they risk being displaced by a whole new technology way of learning, where 15-year-olds begin to say, I don't need to go to college if it doesn't prepare me for where the jobs are. I can do this much more effective another way.
And should businesses be reaching out to universities, I mean, and to try to push them to be more proactive and responsive?
I think businesses owe an obligation to tell the universities they're preparing the jobs in the wrong area, and to partner with universities, which we do at Cisco, in terms of partnering with key universities. If they will graduate people with these skill sets, we will hire them. So I think that public-private partnership is a good example of how universities have to change, and candidly, so does business.
And I think more and more companies are also beginning to do that, because change is difficult. Educational institutions, they're almost like mammoths. You know, they operate in a particular pace. They don't want to transform. They're not as nimble as business entities that need to be nimble to adapt to a changing environment. And I think, you know, as you very well said, John, that ability to cater to what's happening in the community or in the society is very important, to have their ear to the ground. Now, for many of you, you may know that Dubai recently won the privileges to host the World Expo 2020. And the theme that we have is Connecting Minds, Creating the Future. So going back to the earlier comment you had on connections, but despite the importance of, or rather, even though there is such great technological advancements, we cannot forget the importance of that human connection, like Nasreen was saying. That type of the soft skills, the mentorship, I think the mentorship is really very, very key in trying to equip a young man or woman to be able to break the ceiling that they find themselves in.
I'm afraid we're running out of time. But first, please join me in thanking our terrific panel in discussing these issues.